All right, I want to talk about SMU for a second. Good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou, live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I post pointless, barely watchable college football videos almost every single day of the year. We do live shows, call-in shows every Tuesday and Thursday night. We live stream almost all day on Saturdays during the season for all the games. Anyway, we have a really good time here. Make sure you hit subscribe. You'll be glad you did. I want to talk about SMU. They're new into the ACC this year. And I think they have the potential to be the best new team into the ACC, right? They added Cal and Stanford as well from the former Pac-12. Not too high on either one of those. My order, the order I would put them in, I think SMU, then Cal, then Stanford, I think is the worst of the three. But schedule, we've talked a lot about scheduling this offseason with all these different teams, right? Because you've got these mega conferences now with upwards of 16 or more teams and no division. So there's no way for every team to play every other team within the conference. And because there's no divisions, the schedules are drastically different from team to team. So two teams in the same conference can have drastically different schedules. Some teams might have to play the top 3 or 4 teams from their conference, whereas maybe another team only plays one of those top 3 or 4, and maybe they get them at home even. So there's vast differences between scheduling. So we're going to take a look at the SMU schedule here in a second, and you're going to see it sets up pretty good. I mean, I think SMU can win a lot of games. I think they're only an upset or two away from potentially even getting maybe to double-digit wins. We'll take a look at it in a second, but SMU was really, really good last year. Now, they were a group of 5 team last year, obviously, but they went 11-2. They were 10-2 in the regular season. They went 11-2 after winning the AAC championship, and they get a ton back from last year's team, including their starting quarterback, a couple of wide receivers. They also hit the portal really, really hard. They brought in some offensive linemen, a running back at portal, some key players on defense. But if they can hold up over the course of the season in the trenches along the offensive lines, look at that. Did y'all? Who was that? Oh, never mind. That was just an Ivy League helmet, so it hardly even matters. We'll hang that back up later. Where were we? Oh, if they can sort of if they can keep up in the trenches along the lines of scrimmage and continue to get good quarterback play, I think SMU can be a really, really good team this year in the ACC, and their schedule sets up in an interesting way, we'll call it. They play 4 non-con games to start out the season, and all 4 of those games I think are winnable. And then their 5th game of the season is their first ACC game ever, and it's at home against Florida State. Let me put the schedule up on the screen here and show it to you. But they start out on the road at Nevada. That game is actually this weekend, Saturday. It's a week 0 game at 8 o'clock. We're going to be live streaming that game over on the Patreon page. So, of course, you got the Georgia Tech versus Florida State game at noon. We'll live stream that right here on YouTube for whoever wants to come out or come over, hang out, watch the game, and talk about it in real time. We have a really good time on these game streams. And then at 8 o'clock, we'll do the SMU at Nevada game over on the Patreon page. So all of you who are subscribed to Patreon, most of you know how this works, but the game comes on at 8, SMU and Nevada. So around 7:30, I'll post a link on the Patreon page that will direct you to the live stream for that primetime game, SMU and Nevada. The link to the Patreon page is in the description of this video if you want to check it out. But you should really think about joining, especially during the season. We have a lot of fun over there. But they open up this Saturday on the road at Nevada. They're a huge favorite. They're like a 24.5 point favorite over Nevada. So I definitely think they're going to win that game. Will they cover or not? That's a lot of points to cover and lay in a week 1 game. Nevada's going to be without their starting quarterback, though. If I make a bet on this game, and I probably will, I'll probably take SMU total points scored. I think SMU is going to score a bunch of points. But anyway, then they come back home. They play HCU, which I think is Houston Christian. I'll admit I'd never even heard of that before. And then they play BYU, and then they play TCU. They're basically beating up on a bunch of religious schools here early in the season. Houston Christian, Brigham Young, TCU, of course, is Texas Christian, SMU themselves, Southern Methodist. So it's like a month-long holy war here at the beginning of the season outside of this game at Nevada. But those 4 games are winnable. I guess TCU would be the toughest test. I'm kind of down on BYU again this year like I normally am. TCU, of course, took a huge step back last year after making it all the way to the national title game the year before. I think TCU will be better than they were last year, but that's a winnable game for SMU. They get it at home. I mean, it's, you know, I think they could possibly be 4-0 when they host Florida State here in their first ACC game. And this game is going to be massive for SMU. They were a power program back in the 80s. You probably remember that, the Pony Express deal. They got busted with some serious cheating, and the NCAA dropped a hammer on them like nothing we had ever seen before or since. And it basically buried SMU for the better part of 40 years. And they have just now clawed their way back to respectability amongst the power conferences, having now joined the ACC. This is a massive game, a game that SMU fans and boosters and alumni have been waiting on for decades, an opportunity to take on one of the big boys as a member of a big boy conference at home in front of what is going to be a wild crowd there in Dallas. It's hard to pick SMU straight up right now in that game, but this sure seems like a dangerous spot for Florida State. If you pull up the Florida State schedule, and I guess I'll pull it up for you real quick here. Florida State, you can see, plays at SMU here, and then the next week they have to host Clemson, which is arguably their biggest game of the year. There's the Miami game, too, which will also be huge. They play Notre Dame late in the year, but this Clemson game, you know, those are the two favorites in the ACC, Florida State and Clemson. If you're Florida State, you do not want to get caught looking ahead to Clemson when you roll into Dallas to take on SMU this week before. I can't pull the trigger right now and predict that game to be an upset. Let's watch Florida State play this weekend first, and SMU for that matter, before we maybe dive more into that game. But the point is, I think the 4 games before that Florida State game are winnable. I would give SMU at least a 50% chance or higher of winning all 4 of those first games. The Florida State game, no, probably less than a 50% chance. And then they got to play on the road at Louisville, a team that made it to the ACC championship game last year, played Florida State. So back-to-back weeks here. Their first 2 games in the ACC, SMU draws last year's 2 participants in the ACC title game, Florida State at home and Louisville on the road. If there's any way they can split these games, then they're probably going to win. If they split these games, just hear me out. If they split these games against Florida State and Louisville, it's possible that SMU makes it to the ACC title game. Because look at the rest of the schedule. Florida State at home, Louisville on the road, then another bye week at Stanford. I already told you I think SMU is better than Stanford. I think Stanford might be one of the worst teams in the ACC. At Duke. Now, these are back-to-back road games, and that can be tricky, but if you got to play back-to-back road games, these are 2 pretty good ones to draw, right? Duke was good last year. Remember, they lost a ton. They lost their quarterback, their coaching staff, so a lot of new at Duke. I would put the Stanford game over 50% chance to win that for SMU. Duke, I would put right around 50%, depending on how they look under first-year head coach Manny Diaz. But then home against Pitt, and that's their homecoming game. I'm not very high on Pitt. I think this will be a good game. This is another one I would put right around 50%. And then another bye week. Home against Boston College. I think they can win that game. On the road at Virginia. If Stanford's not the worst team in the ACC, Virginia might be. I think that's a winnable game for SMU. And then they close the season out with another newcomer, Cal, at home. I would put that game slightly over 50% chance to win for SMU. Now, I know it's hard to win every game you're supposed to win. So, like, I go through all those games and I say, well, over 50% chance of that, over 50%, over 50%. In a one-off scenario, that might mean something. But over the course of the season, you're bound to lose some of those games, right? And that's, you know, how does SMU, how many of those games do they win and how many do they lose? Forget the Florida State-Louisville game for a second. Assume, if you want to, that they lose both of those games, okay? Because they'll be underdogs in those 2 games for sure, Florida State and Louisville. But looking at this schedule right now, and I'll put it back up on the screen again real quick, how many of these games do you think SMU is going to be an underdog in? And again, I know that being an underdog or a favorite doesn't mean that you're going to win or lose. The point is, ceiling for SMU. What do you think the ceiling is? They may only be an underdog in 2 games. They may be a favorite in 10 of these 12 here. Does that mean I think they're going to go 10-2? Probably not, because like I said, most teams are not going to win every game they're supposed to win. So even if you think SMU is supposed to win those other 10 games outside of Florida State and Louisville, the chances of them doing that would be pretty slim. But could they go 8-4? I mean, I think they could definitely go 8-4 with this schedule. And like I said, they're only, I think I said at the beginning of the video, and I was referring to the Florida State Louisville games in particular, but SMU might be an upset or two away from potentially competing for a spot in that ACC championship game. They're going to be an interesting team to keep an eye on, not just this year, but going forward in the ACC. But there you go. There's a little bit about SMU. They, of course, play this Saturday, so I wanted to talk a little bit about them today. On the road at Nevada this Saturday, 8 p.m. We'll be live streaming during that game right here on YouTube. Well, it'll be on the Patreon page. The Florida State Georgia Tech game will live stream here on YouTube at noon. SMU Nevada, 8 o'clock Saturday night over on Patreon. Link to the Patreon in the description. Make sure you check it out. Appreciate you watching. Please hit the thumbs up. Leave me your comments down below. What do you think about SMU this year? And I'll talk to you again soon. Have a good morning.